Good morning everyone, and welcome to the first SWOP breakfast of 2015. We're especially glad this morning that we have my colleague and friend David Dickinson, who is a professor in the Department of Sociology, and we're very proud to have him as a research associate in SWOP. And he's talking about a really important topic, fighting their own battles, about the postal workers. And comrades, I must confess, I was one of the people who felt extremely irritated by the postal strikes last year. And I must confess that after reading David's article in Business Day, I realized that my irritation came out of ignorance, because I had no idea of the appalling labor practices and false promises which the authorities gave to the casual postal workers. It's a shocking story, and so we're really grateful that David has investigated that in depth. And we are very lucky in having the support, and welcome Camilla, we are very lucky in having the support of FES, because not only for providing the food, the delicious breakfasts on these occasions, but also they have funded the printing of David's research report, which we are going to be able to give you for free, but we thought we'd do it at the end of the presentation to stop you from sitting reading while David is talking. He'll talk for about 20 minutes, people, and then we'll open it up, as we always do, for comments and questions and discussion. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. I'm going to give you an apology in advance. I think quite a large number of people who the presentation refers to are arriving late. And that does reflect the organic nature of worker committee organisations, which I'm going to talk about. So welcome. I find it quite unusual to be standing here. As you all know, this is Senate room, and this is where Senate meets. And I normally occupy a position where David is there, and management sits down here. And my job is to ask very difficult questions of management and to cause problems. So I kind of think that the nature of this presentation, that the roles have been rather reversed, and I'm expecting some quite difficult questions, and I'm in the hot seat, or standing in the hot place on this occasion. So that's to put it on, really on the ground. There's a lot of controversy within this presentation, and I think that's good. I'm going to put it out on the table and open. I hope that there can be debate around it. And the story that I'm going to tell can be framed in different ways. But the way I'm going to frame it, although I think we'll have discussions that look at it differently, is really an amazing story how a group of workers with very little power took on forces much larger than themselves and actually did what other much larger organisations, such as Sociology, had failed to do over a decade or more. So this is a story about Mabarete. I'll explain why they got their name, this group of workers who will be arriving at some point. And how they actually entered labour broking in the South African Post Office. I'm going to assume that people here know about labour broking and the triangular employment relationship. I'm not going to go over that and really focus on this process of mobilisation that took place. So this is the outline of the presentation. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I just want to pick up here. There's a very telling poster by Tsidiso, 15 years as casuals, black managers, how can you be happy? So it summed up quite a lot of the conflict here that was going on around casual workers, around a black situation in almost all dimensions, and the length of time. Now the word casual is used in many different ways, and I'm going to use it in slightly different ways, and I hope you can understand in context. When this story starts around 2000, what we're having is casual workers as casual workers of the employees of labour brokers who are working in the post office. And that continues for over a decade. And the results of the strikes that I'm going to talk about end up with those casuals being taken into the post office, but still as casuals. The difference is now that they're employees of the post office and not the labour brokers. And indeed, some remain casuals even to this day, and that's part of the story of the current labour disputes that go on. So I'll run through the presentation as it's outlined here. Methodology, quickly. This research started in 2009. Friends in Kaplahong got jobs in the post office, except it turned out, of course, they were in the post office but employed by labour brokers. And I watched events through their eyes initially. That became much more formalised in 2014, last year, when I did a series of interviews with the leadership of the organisations that had emerged and with rank and file members. We also participate observation from 2011 to the current period. I'm still working with some of the legacy organisations. A number of other sources, but what I just want to say at the bottom was ethical clearances from Wits Human Ethics Committee. But I have to say quite clearly that I avoided discussions in which individuals would implicate themselves or other people in criminal activity. That's not actually a major problem, because if you go to the source of the Labour Court interdict brought by the South African Post Office, there's an enormous amount of information about exactly what was happening, and that's in the public record. So quickly then, how did the labour brokers or the TES, Temporary Employment Services, how did they get into the post office? Well, it's an amazing story that the post office was incredibly successful. Of all the state-owned enterprises were all instructed to do two things. One was to roll out services in the interest of development and not to burden the fiscus. And the post office for a number of years did that. It rolled out points of delivery, post offices and other things. It massively increased the number of physical addresses, which was essential for people to get credit and to be in the formal system. And it got massively increased deliveries to those addresses. And at the same time, it made a profit. Between 2005 and 2012, it made a profit between 20 million and close to 500 million on one occasion. Now, what was not visible, and invisibility is an important part of this story, was how this was done, or largely how this was done by the increasing use of casual workers. Now, from 2000, permanent posts were frozen in the post office as part of cost cutting. And of course, you can only freeze posts for so long. So increasingly what happened is that the posts were not filled by permanent employees, they were left technically as unfilled posts, but were actually filled by casual workers. And by 2011, just on the salary bills alone, there's a saving of a rough calculation, 380 million, simply on salaries, never mind benefits. So you can see that the success, the financial success, is based very much on the savings of getting cheap labour. There was almost a dozen labour broking companies, and they ranged from mom and pop organisations. I should say it was all BEE. That was the only real criteria that was being applied, through to what are effectively front organisations for the highly respectable agencies, Adcorp and Kelly, who were involved in this business. What's interesting though is, and I haven't got time to go into it, there's a whole story, a lot of these labour brokers do not conform to how we would look at it in the textbooks. They were in fact price takers, like the post office, and the contracts were incredibly fragile. They themselves were vulnerable as well, while they in turn were exploiting masses of unemployed people who needed jobs. So what was created was a two-tier workforce, and my key argument here is that this was responsible for this massive rupture of workplace order that we've been seeing over the last 3 to 4 years, and it's continuing. It's important to note this was neither temporary nor non-core workers. So these are two classic arguments for labour broking. It's a temporary fulfilment, pregnancy leave, maternity leave, or it's cleaning, it's non-core workers. This was neither of those things. These people were placed, in some cases for well over a decade, doing core business, delivering mail in particular, but other functions as well. Once you put the calculations of saving of benefits, it was basically three workers for the price of one. That's a quote from a manager. This was what was pushing the process. So managers were able to meet targets, and head office didn't ask too many questions. It's an amazing story about organisational design here, about how this whole process was half seen and not seen. I call it a dirty secret in the report, People knew it was going on, but no one really wanted to ask too many questions because there was so much money involved. Complete anti-union stance from labour brokers. You were basically joined a union, you'd be fired. Pillar to post situation, so they would be bounced between the labour brokers and the post office whenever there was a grievance. As I said, rough and ready disciplinary proceedings. Supervisors can just pick up the phone and say, I need a replacement, and that was you finished. And then one of the saddest things, I think, one of the most unpleasant things about this was the terrible divisions between permanent workers and casual workers. Complete lack of solidarity and exploitation by permanent workers of their co-workers working alongside them, exactly the same thing. So here you see, this is a 2011 poster, which pretty much sums fairly accurately this division between salary and this narrative of slavery that developed around that. So, how big was this problem? This is the Employment Equity Report, so it shows the issue in reverse. Now, for whatever reason, the South African Post Office only started compiling reports in 2008. It didn't include labour broker workers. Now, legally it should have done. Section 57 of the Employment Equity Act, if you have someone in the company for more than 3 months, irrespective of who's employing them, they should be counted, but they neglected to do that. So what you see here is the end of, if you look at the blue line, the permanent workers are actually decreasing because there's a gradual attrition. Obviously this starts in 2000, but we don't have the records, of permanent workers, and they're being replaced by invisible casual workers. Then suddenly you get this amazing increase of about a third, because what's happening there is that the casual workers, having succeeded in breaking labour broking, are now brought in as employees, casual employees of the post office, and suddenly they appear. 8,000. So about a third of the South African Post Office workforce by 2011 was employed by labour brokers, and these were core workers. You have a third of the workforce in that situation. Right. Well, obviously we have trade unions, and the purpose of trade unions, of course, is to protect workers' rights. CWU, Communication Workers Union, we call it COO, was the dominant union in the post office. They initially muscled out some of the other unions, got an agency shop agreement, they had a monopoly right up to the end of 2012 when SWOP, a second union, was recognised inside the post office. Now, there's a very complex relationship between COO and the casual workers. Now, casual workers were not members of COO because COO had a recognition agreement with SAPL. It didn't have a recognition with the labour brokers. And to be quite honest, it made incredibly little attempt to make any agreements with labour brokers. On the other hand, it used casual workers in the street theatre of strikes. So when you needed large numbers of people in a demonstration, the casual workers would be pulled in. And one of the ways of pulling the casual workers in was to speak on their behalf. So there was a constant process of promising by COO that they were going to end casual work in the post office and convert the temporary workers, who were not their members, but were allied to them, into permanent positions. And this is the data they've been able to collect from the various collective bargaining agreements and other sources. So this starts in 2005, and it's complicated, and the working paper sort of does some of the details of that. But they set a deadline for the 30th of October 2005 to end labour broking. And what you see is each year, nothing happens. All that happens is the deadline is put back. So it now becomes 2006, September 2007, it just goes on and on and on. Nothing ever happens. All that really happens is that the number of casual workers increase. And this eventually becomes lampooned by casual workers who call it come September. Come September, when the negotiations are concluded, permanent workers get a pay increase and they remain casual workers. And, right, welcome guys, some of the guys here. So, COO, in a way, puts itself forward as protecting their rights and doesn't. So, eventually, of course, casual workers realise that, despite the fact that they want to be in COO, they want to be permanent workers, that this is not going to actually happen. So then this is where we start to see that they start to organise themselves. It starts around mid-2005, a very complex story of casual workers' committees. Now these are liminal, not limited, liminal organisations. They're meeting in public parks, on football fields, in townships, they've got no money, they pop out what they can from their pockets to pay when they need to go for transport and so on. And with incredibly limited resources, both capacity resources and also financial and any other resources. There's committees set up in East Strand, West Strand, Val, Victoria and elsewhere. It's far more complicated than that. There's all these kind of subcommittees and moving groups, and I talk about in the paper, but it's popping up all over the place. Some broke with coup immediately, fairly quickly, I should say, and decided that the coup was not going to help them. Some double-footed, by which they carried on with coup, but also were working as their committees on the Saturday mornings, but they would be going to shop stewards' meetings of coup in the week. Some committees were sometimes united, and other times they worked in silos, so they worked separately. That's a little bit of a euphemism. At times, relationships between them were quite hostile. So there was this toing and froing, changing constellations of them. But one of the implications of working in silos was sort of reinventing the wheels. Multiple initiatives were taking place, attempting to resolve the problem. Now, what's important to stress is just how much effort went in